New York State Procurement Council, date November 26th of 2013. My name is Sergio Paneke. I'm the newly appointed Chief Procurement Officer for the state of New York. I feel blessed to be here with all of you, and I'm honored and humbled as such to chair this great committee as we move procurement forward in New York State. I really look forward to working with each and every one of you in furtherance of that effort. And once again, thank you so much for everybody to be here, and I look forward to working with everybody. First order of business is introduction of new members. I'd like to introduce Ronald Tescarella from National Industries of the Blind. If I may, I'll give a little bit of background on Ron. Ron is the Senior Vice President and Chief Credit Officer for Pathfinder Bank in Otsego, New York. He's responsible for implementing the bank's business plan, streamlining the bank's lending processes, and working closely with bank administration to foster growth in the loan portfolio. Having spent more than 25 years in the banking business, Tescarella has held various positions of increasing responsibility at banks in Syracuse, Utica, and Otsego, New York. Tescarella is past chairman of Industries for the Blind of New York State and Central Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired in Utica, New York. Active in many local community affairs, he is past president of the Otsego Chamber of Commerce and a member of its Finance Committee, a member of the Syracuse Economic Development Corporation Loan Board, treasurer for Seneca Hill Manor, treasurer for the Safe Haven Museum, and treasurer for the Otsego Rehabilitation Corporation Board of Directors. Tescarella earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration from the State University of College at Otsego, New York, 1979. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So first order of old business, I guess, is the approval of the minutes of the meeting held October 30th of 2013. Is there any discussion of the minutes? Comments, additions? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented? By Michael. Second. James, thank you. So next order of business is, excuse me. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No abstentions? So next on the agenda is our Deputy Counsel, Ann Phillips from OGS, on a number of issues.
We had the meeting in February, and then with the last meeting, I forgot to fill you in on an addition to the state finance law, the Procurement Stewardship Act. As part of the passage of the budget this year, we added an additional category for discretionary purchasing up to $200,000, and that is for food, including milk and dairy products grown, produced, or harvested in New York State. It did come with a little bit of a caveat. If you are exercising more than $50,000 worth of that discretionary authority, you have to post the procurement on your website prior to executing it. This was intended to give agencies an ability to access locally grown food. That was Part P of Chapter 55 of the laws of 2013. And that is my report on legislation for this session. We are in the process, obviously, of getting ready for 2014, and hopefully at the December meeting I can fill you in on any developments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. Next on the agenda is Catherine Macri. I hope I said Catherine's name correctly. Did you touch on those issues?
Oh, no.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Catherine. Ann's got a couple other items.
We have updated the discretionary purchasing guidelines to conform with statutory changes. We just wanted to let you know, and that'll be available we'll post that on the website. In addition, we are making similar changes to the guidelines on contract reporter advertising thresholds and notice requirements, and those have been updated, and those will also be available on the website. Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. So now, Catherine, if you will. Oh, I'm sorry, questions?
I have one question about the discretionary purchasing guidelines. I have a one-pager. Is that the total, is that where the changes are, or was the whole guidelines shortened? Because it used to be like 4 pages?
I think we took out some of the description of when the statute went into effect and which governor it was under, so we just kind of cleaned it up to make it a little bit more concise, Nancy.
Well, there's also no recommended language for the contract reporter that used to be in the old discretionary guidelines?
I mean, I can take a look at that. I'm sorry that Noreen Van Doren was the one responsible for doing the updates, and she's was not available to be at the meeting, but if I can bring it back at the next meeting, I will look into it and respond to your concern.
I have to apologize. I think they're stapled wrong. I had some staples, but page 3 is actually stapled to the back of the context for advertising threshold, so that is in there, maybe. The last 4 pages to the back.
Gotcha.
Okay. I still will see what the changes were, Nancy, and get back to you.
Yeah, I sent them back and forth with Noreen. I
Okay.
sent her some. So.
All right. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Nancy. Catherine. So sorry. Catherine Macri, the Environmental Policy Coordinator with Environmental Facilities Corporation, will be doing a presentation on green procurement. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to Ann Phillips and everyone that I've been working with at OGS since the inception of Executive Order Number 4. I'm here as the chair of the training subcommittee for Executive Order Number 4 to talk about integration of the green procurement information into the key resources for procurement that OGS provides. Currently, the green procurement information is separate from the main procurement guidance for staff, vendors, state agencies, and other eligible purchases on the OGS website. This creates a little bit of a barrier for both government purchasing agents and for vendors who are required to meet the New York State goals for green purchasing. So the Executive Order 4 Training Subcommittee and the Green Procurement Subcommittee requests integration of the Green Procurement Guidelines into the traditional procurement guidance materials. The primary goals for this integration are to provide a better understanding of procurement requirements, preferences, and procedures, including green procurement, and to incorporate green procurement into standard training, for state agency staff, vendors, contractors, and others. Executive Order 4 is the Interagency Committee on Sustainability and Green Procurement, and it is co-chaired by Commissioner Roanne DeCito of OGS and Commissioner Joe Martens of the Department of Environmental Conservation. EO4 established a green procurement and agency sustainability program and directs state agencies, public authorities, and public benefit corporations to implement sustainability initiatives and to green their procurement. Green procurement is defined as purchasing goods and services that reduce the negative impact on the environment and human health compared to traditional products, whether they're obtained from preferred sources, OGS state contracts, or the open market. There are a number of key resources and materials from OGS for procurement on the OGS website, and I've listed a few of them in the handout that was in your package today. And we request the integration of the green procurement definitions and guidances into these standards and guidance materials. Green procurement is already required by law, both in the New York State finance law related to state purchasing and in a number of executive orders from the New York State Green Cleaning Executive Order and the New York State Green Cleaning Law. I already mentioned EO4, which specifically requests the development of green specifications and green procurement by state agencies, as well as Build Smart New York and which is, Executive Order 88, and Executive Order 142, which encourages the uses of biofuels. All of these laws and executive orders relate back to different types of procurement that state agencies and authorities conduct on a regular basis. Green procurement is supported by Fortune 500 companies throughout the United States and abroad as well. And sustainability does matter to the corporations. And so this is not a radical departure for the major corporations that provide goods and services here and across the U.S. So we have been fortunate enough to work on this interagency committee for several years, and it has been a very gratifying experience. It's been one of the first times that so many agencies have gotten together to to work towards the common goals across agencies, and it's been working wonderfully. There are a number of agencies that have done a great deal of good in green procurement, and OGS has even garnered some awards for contracts such as the aggregate computer buy, which has saved a great deal of money as well as benefited the environment by reducing toxics and using recyclable materials in the packaging and so forth. And so I really made that a little bit briefer than I intended to, but this way you have an opportunity for questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Any questions?
Yes.
Nancy?
Any plans for training state purchasing officials or any kind of plan for greater implementation of sustainable purchasing?
Do I have any plan for educating
Purchasing officials?
purchasing officials?
In sustainability concepts and greening procurement?
Well, we have been working, I have been working with OGS and other state agencies and presenting at the Procurement Council since the inception of EO4.
The purchasing forum?
Yes.
Nancy, I think you raised...
Be-
go ahead.
Beyond that, I don't have an additional plan for training at this time, but I think it would be very helpful to have the green procurement information incorporated into the basic standard guidance materials, because I think it needs to be presented to all of the procurement staff and the procurement officials rather than the ones that come to a special session on green procurement, because there are basic requirements that impact all types of procurement, maybe not each and every product or service, but all types across the board, and it would be very helpful to integrate the materials into the basic guidances.
Thomas, did you have... Oh, I'm sorry. Michael?
Just one quick question. You may have said this already. The effective date for this?
The effective date for...
Implementation and requirements for compliance?
The requirements for green procurement have already been in place. There's various references here that have come online over a long period of time. EO4 has been in existence since 2008, but in terms of implementation, this is right now the first time that I have been able to present to the Procurement Council and to request the integration of green procurement into the basic procurement guidance. The New York State procurement guidelines were last issued in 2009, and I'm not sure what your schedule is for redrafting it and reissuing it. So
Thank you.
we would have to figure that out.
Nancy?
Well, Kathy was talking, the guidelines came to mind because periodically I go into them and I saw they were last updated in 2009. But I think the last time they were updated, it was a fairly comprehensive process, and there was a work group that worked on it as a subcommittee that reported back to the main council. So I've noticed that there's other updates needed to the guidelines. Are there plans to update the guidelines in the near future?
We had talked about this recently internally, and we are going to develop a plan for doing that, which we will present to the Procurement Council, and then we'll proceed with the plan. Some of the things are more or less just statutory changes, which are pretty pro forma. I'm not sure you need a work group to do that. So that may be the first stage, and then the second stage would be getting a work group together to see if there were other kind of policy aspects of the procurement guidelines that we would want to address. Obviously, haven't really talked to Sergio about this yet, so if I'm surprising him with anything, it really is going to be in his ballpark now.
If I can just speak to that, and Catherine, thank you so much for the presentation. It's how we as a group take green procurement into green operations. I think that's the real next step. I think New York State, has done a great job in moving green procurement forward. Now it's a matter of how do you go about institutionalizing it? How does it really become, part and parcel of the way that we operate each and every day from a green ops standpoint? And I look forward to working with Catherine and her team, in that effort as we bring forward, good recommendations to this body.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So moving forward on the agenda. Oh,
Sorry. I'll just
you want to go ahead? I'll just speak loudly. So moving forward on the agenda, Christine Irvin, Assistant Director of OGS NISPO, will report on first recommendations under OGS standing.
Excuse me, Sergio, just a quick question. Based on the request from the airport, are they asking for us to take some action to...
Catherine, was that just the presentation?
Were you asking the council to take some action? You asked
Good question, Thomas.
incorporating the EO4 and other language into the Procurement Council guidelines, right? That's what you're asking?
Yes, both the procurement guidelines, which you're going to have to, as said, think about when that redrafting will occur. The website, the OGS website has procurement services in one area and green procurement in another, green procurement specifications. The contract directories, green procurement is the last bullet under a number of materials in the contract directories website, which is separate, and we're requesting that the green procurement requirements and guidance be incorporated into the main materials. And another item is doing business with New York State, a guide to states' procurement practices. So incorporating information for vendors about green procurement, how they can comply and compete with green products and services, as well as the contract reporter. And so to speak to the other gentleman's question about when, that's a good question. But we, meaning many people, not just the folks on the 11 agencies on the interagency committee and the training people and the sustainability coordinators and each agency and the procurement folks that are aware of green procurement, have been using these resources and going back and forth and attempting to do the right thing and doing a very good job of it. And as you move forward and looking at these different resources, and if you make any changes to them, this would be a good opportunity for integrating them.
Can I, just to chime in, can we, with regard to the action items you just listed, is there a way to get some type of memorialized, for you to memorialize that for the council?
Right, if you could have a formal request to point out
Exactly.
those points so that we know. 'Cause
I don't think it was clear that there was, until the question was posed, I don't think it was clear that there were action items upon which we were expected to consider. So if we can maybe have that in some form.
Yes.
And we could,
Karen.
and then we could, I would imagine, be able to vote on it in the December meeting to start the implementation process.
Quite frankly, I would appreciate a little bit more time to really digest the portfolio and green products and the full offering. I do know that there's a number of solicitations that I believe might be in process, a better understanding of preferred sources and their offerings and how that all stages in the overall strategic direction. So if I could request a motion to table until the first meeting in the new year, I would appreciate that. Is that okay? So could I entertain a motion to table?
So moved.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that. Second. Oh, I need a second? Second. Thank you, Mecca. And all in favor, say aye. All opposed, nay. Thank you. So moved. So our next order of business is Christine Irvin, Assistant Director, OGS NICEPRO, will report on preferred source recommendations under OGS authority.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
One of the things we're required to present to you is any new applications that were approved since the last Procurement Council meeting. Given that we had the Procurement Council meeting just 4 weeks ago, there are no new applications to present to you at this time. The next order of business that I have is an update on the digital printing application. You may recall there was a lot of discussion at our last meeting. OGS NICEPRO is working on collecting some data, including information from NICID. We do not have all of the data that we need at this point, but we are still working on it. I expect that we will be able to present this hopefully at the next Procurement Council. Ron has a question.
Well, question is more of a statement, I guess.
Okay.
Just to confirm, since the last council meeting, we have been working with OGS to provide the requested information. NICID has provided additional benchmarking documentation to document that the proposed pricing is within 15% of the prevailing market. As requested by OGS, we are in the process of also acquiring copies of the contracts and associated purchase orders that our partner agencies and member agencies have or have had with various New York State agencies for digital printing to further validate the pricing. And the folks that we're working with are the Camelot Printing, which is NMW or WBE, Amsterdam Printing, Miller Printing, Avalon, which is in Syracuse, and New York Digital Lithographers, which is in New York City. To date, ESD has not engaged with OGS and NICID to participate in the review process. We look forward to their participation so we can have a more collaborative discussion and resolution and hopefully presentation at the next meeting.
OGS has had conversations, just for clarity, with NICEPRO. And we are working with ESD as well as you folks and some other folks to get data so that we can come back with a more robust analysis for you as requested.
We would hope we could participate in those discussions.
Any questions? Okay, the next order of business is NIB's drug test kits.
Carrie Laney, Executive Director for NIB, will make a presentation.
Hello. Again, my name is Carrie Laney. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Preferred Source Program for People Who Are Blind. I would like to thanks to OGS for your work with us on this application, and thank you to the Procurement Council for reviewing it with us today. We are requesting the Council's approval for 3 styles of drug test kits. 2 are urine-based on-site drug tests, and 1 is for oral fluid swab test. Our product line is manufactured in the United States, Blue Earth, Minnesota, by Express Diagnostics. And I do want to acknowledge that I have Duffy Neighbors from Express Diagnostics here with us today, if there's any really detailed questions. We have partnered with a supplier to afford us the best buying power from the manufacturer, and that partner is actually another agency in the NIB family that employs people who are blind. That's the Lighthouse for the Blind of Fort Worth, Texas. We are extremely proud of our ability to not only provide U.S.-made product to New York State, but also to provide it in a way that creates employment opportunities for people who are blind both in Texas and in Albany. The direct labor in Albany will be performed at the Northeast Association for the Blind at Albany and will initially consist of repackaging. 100% of the direct labor activities being performed in Albany will be performed by people who are blind or visually impaired. We are also committed to finding additional steps for people who are blind or visually impaired. Concerns have been raised about the overlap between preferred sources and the commodities. I do want to assure you that there's several differences here, and that we're not setting any precedent. There are dozens of items that we have overlap on, but more importantly, I would say the form, function, utility of our offering, because our drug tests are customizable, makes it it's a different type of product line. And on a whole, if you look at our whole offering, ours are actually equal or lower in costs. So with that, I'd like to allow for any questions on our application.
Questions from the group?
I have a question.
Mary Beth?
In your application, you talk about some of the work being done here in New York and some in Texas. Can you give us some idea of the ratio between how much this will benefit New Yorkers versus Texans?
The projection for the FTE is totally Albany, New York labor. We're projecting 1.1 FTE based on our initial sales estimate, which was slightly lower than what OGS determined. So that number is completely an Albany number, and the repackaging and customizable kitting that happens here is all New York labor, just for the New York State sales. Really what we're just doing is partnering with Fort Worth for that buying power. They're not having any real value added above that.
In your application, you used the phrase continued employment. So will there be new people gaining employment through this, or is it just taking people that are already employed and giving them something different to do?
It's more of the latter. A lot of times there's different types of work that we have, that we might move someone to work on one project and then the next day a different project to try to maximize the amount of labor hours.
Okay, and then my final question, maybe this isn't too much my concern, but this is the second application where in a row where some of the work is currently being done by the Industries for the Disabled. And so, of course, I'm a little concerned that we're sort of taking a small pie and cutting it into even smaller pieces. I don't know, Ron, if you can speak to this at all, but I'm concerned that when we make an allowance for the Industries for the Disabled to perform something, that they probably incur some sort of investment to ramp up and be able to do that. Right. And I would just want to know that if we're taking this pie and cutting it smaller, that we're not doing any harm to the Industries for the Disabled in doing that.
And I'll certainly let Ron answer that direct question to Ron. But I do want to point out there was a statewide contract that provided drug test kits that's no longer in effect. So I would make the suggestion that while the total pie might not be getting bigger, the amount of pieces that we can get for it, does that, my analogy working there? There was an additional option that's now no longer, and I would say that we're now providing additional option.
So if I hear you, what you're saying is you don't think you're taking any business away from the Industries for the Disabled?
I do not believe. I think this is a different type of offering.
The pie is only so big, and some of the items, as you could see from the price analysis, conflict directly. Just to give everyone a kind of a sense from NYSED and individuals with disabilities, we employ about almost 1,500 people on commodity contracts. And based on the sales that we have, it comes to about $26,000 in sales per individual. Okay, and based upon the hours that they work, these folks, are the most severely disabled. They have the most challenges, so they work about 5 hours a week. And also, they work 5 hours a week because in many cases, that's all the work they have. So when you talk about $600,000 in sales or $1 million in sales, you're really talking about a considerable number of people that are potentially affected, right? Because if you have one person for $26,000, that's almost 4 people per $100,000. It's almost 40 people for $1 million. Now, I don't know how the ratio works for Industries for the Blind, if they work more hours, if they have as many people, because we're talking FTEs, and that's how we usually do that, because it's a common term. But just there is an impact, and the agencies that perform on drug test kits have invested in equipment or training or et cetera. Same with incontinence briefs. It doesn't, that I'm just giving you the impact. That doesn't change the statute. There can be overlap. The statute allows for it. And I do, in another vein, have some questions, however, if I may. I don't know if that answers your question in terms of impact. And again, let me preference my questions by saying, that at the end of the day, the individuals with challenges that are employed on preferred source contracts are equally important. I know there's a statute and it has a pecking order, but whether they be blind or disabled or incarcerated, in my mind, they're equally important. So, it's unfortunate that one individual working on a preferred source contract, may gain employment at the expense of another, but that's the environment that we're in these days. And it's why it's also important that we look at new opportunities so that, we're not directly competing. But I would just, my first question is, I'd like to know when the NIB application was submitted to OGS. Pardon? The date on it. Okay. Well, we've had, NICID has submitted applications in April for price reductions and product line extensions on this product, meaning additional kits to our current offerings. And, the NICID application has been at OGS for 7 months, over 240 days, which is more than twice the 120 days provided in statute for recommendation and approval. It wasn't until 6:12 p.m. last night that there were any questions or communications on this application, NICID's application, other than the weekly status report that we received that said that they were preparing for final review. However, at 6:12 last night, we received a completed review and pricing comparisons for our applications. And, I guess I'd like to understand the rationale for the price comparisons, because they differ from the application submitted to OGS by National Industries for the Blind. In other words, the application in front of you uses a comparison of the state of Iowa, the GSA, and NICID's pricing. And by the way, that's NICID's revised pricing that hasn't been approved yet. And the price comparisons used for NICID's application utilizes the state of California, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, all of which are in the top 10. I think California may be the largest prison population in the United States. Iowa's 40th. So that might have something to do with pricing. And I would also like to know if the contracts and terms and conditions from these various contracts that were used for pricing comparisons were reviewed by OGS to make sure we're comparing apples to apples and that we're consistent. And lastly, the review, again, on our application, and I'm sorry I refer to that so much because this is really National Industries for the Blind application that we're discussing, but I think the comparison is relevant. The review by OGS received last night concluded that NYSED needed to clarify its application by reducing pricing to be equal to or lower than the comparable product pricing provided rather than the 15% of market as provided in the application that you have before you. So it seems that there's inconsistencies in what's used for pricing comparison in applying the statute. And given that we don't recall when the NIB application was submitted, it certainly had to be submitted after ours if they're using our revised pricing. But to add a new product to the list at this time, I think it would only be reasonable and fair that the NYSED price reduction and additions be approved by OGS at least prior or simultaneously to the action of the council, and especially, given the reference to our pricing. More importantly, however, I think that the same criteria should be used for pricing comparisons, for contract terms and conditions, and I would request that this application be tabled until this thing can be sorted out and consistency applied, and then acted on by OGS accordingly. Thank you.
Any questions?
I do have one question. It's my understanding that the drug kits are different. I don't know how a drug kit would be different, but does that affect the analysis that Ron has alluded to?
Ron has raised a lot of points of which we haven't had the benefit to prepare for or understand or get ready for. I can tell you that it was our intention to have his application for drug test kits approved and finished before the Procurement Council meeting. I believe that upon review of everything and looking at everything, we noticed that there were some things that were not quite right. I also can tell you that we have in excess of over 200 applications from NYSED in-house that we are working on, in addition to having these back-to-back Procurement Council meetings, which takes a tremendous amount of work to get ready for. Carrie Laney might be able to tell you when they submitted their application if she has that information with her, but I do not. I can tell you it's been in-house a lot longer than yours.
It certainly predates my tenure, which was about 7 months. I think memory serves it's been about a year. 2011. Thank you. 2011.
Yeah, it's a much longer period.
With all due respect to Mr. Romano, we have none of the information that he has shared with us today to make any determination. There are a number of statements he made with regards to OGS's review of the pricing analysis, and I'd like to get a response from OGS as to the pricing analysis so we can make a determination on what's in front of us and not necessarily what you haven't received and haven't reviewed.
OGS is committed to presenting the best possible prices. That is what we have done. We stand by the analysis. We believe it is firm. We believe that NYSED's concerns can be addressed at our monthly meeting and should be addressed outside of the Procurement Council with their individual application because it would not normally rise to this level.
Nancy?
I have a question for Ms. Laney.
I'm sorry.
What is the accuracy of the testing? It seems as though your testing is customizable, And so does that, I understand that false positives can be a problem in this area for agencies, drug courts, and the people who use these kinds of tests. What is the history of accuracy for the types of tests you're offering?
That is a very good question, Nancy. Thank you. On average, the drug test kits have an accuracy of 98%. All positives are sent to the lab to verify, so that there shouldn't be any issues as relates to false positives.
I'm sorry, please go.
As I was reading the application, I was wondering how the projected sales are forecasted. I believe in the application it stated that sales may be over $1 million, and it did mention the Office of Mental Health as a potential buyer. But the Office of Mental Health does have its own in-house laboratory. And for all of our facilities, our hospitals located across the state, the testing is done at the hospitals, and the specimens are sent to one of our research facilities, which does have a lab facility. So I think we need to be accurate in terms of what the expectations are in terms of expected sales.
When we did our benchmarking and analysis to look at the state spend, we looked at the last 5 years of state spend, and the average was $1.2 million.
Okay, thank you.
Just one quick question. When we talked about job creation, I just want to make sure that I fully understood that no jobs were actually going to be created as a result. It's going to be the reassignment of responsibilities?
It will add hours to people's part-time work status.
Okay. So no new jobs are being created?
A total 1.1 FTE, but that's really just additional employment hours for people who are currently at NABA.
Can I ask one other question? Please. I noticed that in the recommendation and conclusion there was a thought. OGS recommends that the 8 items provide a customization option at no additional cost. Unable to confirm the frequency of which these customizations. Wouldn't customization be of value in the marketplace for the end user? And would the restriction of those 8 items, I mean, to have a whole list of items available, but you can't order these 8, just kind of adds confusion in the ordering and processing. Wouldn't the end user use that as part of their form, function, and utility?
They certainly could. We were trying to be sensitive to the Procurement Council's concern expressed last month that NIB's pricing not exceed NYSED's. So they were lower in other areas, or equal to, in most cases lower. In those 8 cases, they were slightly more than NYSED, 9% or less, I believe. And so we were trying to be sensitive to that.
And do you mind if I add, Christine?
Go ahead.
First of all, and I very much appreciate the need to flag that, right, in your review, but we still do make the case that having the customizable option, there is a value and potential cost savings, and that's why we wanted to continue to present those 8 drug test kits and hope that the Procurement Council would find that favorably because, again, of the different form, function, utility, and we also discussed at the last meeting that could also include pricing considerations. And for a customer who knows what kind of test they need and be able to customize to test for those items, those particular drugs, they could very well be saving money. But that would be a form, function, utility decision of the customer.
I guess just 2 things. One, Michael, just to put aside your fears. We would have come forth and shared the information I talked about had we had it prior, the review prior to 6:30 last night. So apologize, we weren't able to do that ahead of time, but we would have showed the price comparison. I actually agree with and appreciate your sensitivity, but I don't think that the proceedings from last Procurement Council meeting on the incontinent briefs and the pricing disparities and the preference among preferred sources, I don't think that the opinion that's deemed in this conclusion was actually reached by the council, and I happen to agree that it is a form, function, and utility in terms of pricing amongst preferred source, and that's what Mary Beth had brought up. What about, are we going to, have to, given that Industries for the Blind has the preference, are we going to have to pay more for the product when NYSED is lower priced? And I think at the time, the council determined that form, function, and utility pricing would be part of that. And so I don't think there's any need to exclude these 8 items, because I think the customer themselves would have the opportunity to do just that under form, function, and utility. So I would oppose that recommendation that the 8 items where NYSED is lower priced be removed from the offering. And I'll read exactly because I focused on this. The characterization of the discussion at the last meeting is not accurate. And the action taken with regard to the application under consideration at this time, it wasn't influenced or decided as implied. The recommendation conflicts with the statutory provisions and requirements as well as precedent. The statute clearly provides for an overlap of offerings by multiple preferred source providers without regard to price differences, as long as the price is within 15% of the prevailing market. The statute clearly addresses the order of preference of purchases, where multiple preferred source providers offer the same or similar commodities or services. The statute clearly provides for form, function, and utility determinations to address the overlap of the preferred source offerings. Eliminating items in a manner recommended reduces agency purchasing alternatives unnecessarily and is contrary to statutory provisions and intent. And unnecessarily eliminating items from the list reduces agency purchasing choices, where form, function, and utility determinations will be based upon criteria other than price, such as supply and demand, delivery, compatibility. And the recommendation, I think, would establish a precedent that will introduce additional workload on a already burdened staff and contention among the parties if price comparisons between providers become a basis for ongoing price revisions and item eliminations amongst competing preferred source providers. So I would suggest that, in summary, that the recommendation for the motion for approval be revised to eliminate that statement. But I would also ask, in all fairness, that it be tabled until our applications for price review can be reviewed simultaneously with the approval for this addition to the list.
The 2 applications do stand on their own, but I'll leave that to the Procurement Council to make their points.
May I make a motion to approve the application inclusive of the 8 items?
Inclusive of the 8 items, Nancy?
Correct.
Just a point of order. We have to first answer his motion. So if we could restate the...
Oh, no, I don't have a
not a
motion.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Right.
That's why I leave it to the body. There's a motion on the table right now to approve the application inclusive of the 8 items for NYSED, or for NIB, excuse me. Do I have a second? Seeing none, motion fails. Michael?
I was going to second it.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
Move forward, we can get a vote.
All in favor, say aye. We'll do a roll call vote, if you will. Starting with Thomas.
Aye.
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 Aye. No.
No.
Aye.
No.
No.
Aye.
No.
No.
Motion fails. Motion fails. Thank you. Can I ask for a motion to table the item and address some of the issues brought to the body?
Can I add to that motion?
Please, Mayor?
Can we suggest that it be tabled and that both this drug testing proposal and the one from Industries for Disabled be presented simultaneously so that we can view them both?
Excellent.
I second that.
Second with Nancy. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Abstentions? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just a quick question. So that means that we'll just come back to the next. We'll present again at the next one, or we'll have a quick
Correct.
conversation and you could review that. I don't have to do an appeal of the previous rejection.
No, it's been
Okay.
tabled. The
Okay.
item has been tabled, and then given the motion, we will look collectively at both applications and then bring a recommendation again to the body.
Okay, great. Understood. Thank you for the clarification. And thank you for
Thank you,
consideration.
Carrie. Thank you for your time. Ron?
Probably just a point so I understand this better in my first meeting. I'm not sure I understand the motion. It's probably a little late for this. But aren't you setting a precedent by not having them both stand independently? Should we then look at the backlog of all issues that are pending in front of OGS before we move any issue forward? I mean, I'm not asking that as a question. It's rhetorical. I mean, who knows what items are out there under review if you don't look at each one independently? That would be the one thing. And on this one for NIB, we're really looking or focusing on 8 items. There's many more items on the list that they're looking to add, more than just the 8 that seem to be questioned. The overlap seems to be a minor part of this. It would have seemed that this should have stood on its own. Otherwise, going forward, I guess I would motion that we look at the entire backlog and not bring anything forward unless we look at everything on the backlog that matches up to it.
I think you raised some valid points, Ron. Just within the last, couple weeks that I've been on board, we've been looking at the portfolio as a whole. I don't know when Mr. Romano received the agenda, but I would assume he received it before 6:15 and knew this item was on the agenda and could have, raised it to us in advance of that. Here nor there. It lends itself that we are looking at the portfolio as a whole. I hope we didn't establish a bad precedent at this moment related to it, but just given the concerns that were raised, I think it just lends itself that we look at this in the individual sense and then move forward from there. We will be looking at those procedures all in together in the collective.
I mean, this is an item that's been on the table since 2011. We've tabled it. It seems that there's an awful lot of work already for OGS that seems to add a layer of things and a further delay on a process that seems to be fairly long as it is. And unfortunately, the only people that will be hurt by that are the disabled. Whether it's, and I might differ, it's four FTEs that are being added, 1.1. The problem right now is that a lot of work is going away from a lot of the agencies and going away from the disabled. The disabled are losing hours every day we sit here. This is the kind of meaningful thing, if you will, that can substitute for some of that work that's going away.
No, I can appreciate that. We did have a motion on the floor to approve it as presented, and it failed. James?
I don't quite understand. Something new to me. If you
I can't hear you, Jim.
I'm sorry, James, if you could point to your microphone. Thank you.
that if you vote on something and the answer is no, and then a motion comes back and says, let's table it, I don't quite understand that. If you say no to something and then another motion is made to table it, then the other motion had no meaning at all. I don't quite understand.
I'll refer to my counsel.
I think the point that we were making with tabling it is there were a number of issues that were raised as part of the ongoing discussion with respect to both the application and to the points that Ron brought to the table, and that we thought that it would involve us as the making a recommendation to go back and take a look at the points that were made here and come back to the council if necessary to review those results, and that is the action that we believe was taken with the motion.
I'm not quite sure I understand you, but the fact remains that, I mean, I listen to Ron and then I listen here, and I get the feeling you're saying, let's vote on this thing, that's something else. And I listen to what he's saying and I say, wow, you know, there's a lot going here. I have no problem. I just want an explanation. If it's going to be tabled and looked at for the good of everybody, that's fine with me.
You say it much better than I do.
I don't quite understand, that's all. We'll drop it there. Thank you. Someday you can try to educate me. Thank you.
Jim, appreciate it.
May I just make a comment? I think the objective is to assist disabled people, and it seems that just hearing what happened today, perhaps a more collaborative approach between the preferred sources might be beneficial, so that this kind of situation does not arise at the 11th hour. We're all trying to do the same thing, benefit the community, and it doesn't seem like we should have competing interests, so to speak.
I agree. I mean, I know in my time in the city and trying to make sure that there was compliance with the law and just the variability in products across that overlap made that very, very difficult. And that's something that I've raised to all three of the preferred sources, not just those two that are present today. I think we do need to all collaborate and bring some clarity to this great policy.
I agree, David, and Ron. I also share your frustration in terms of the length of time. These folks, there are a lot of unemployed individuals out there that could use a job. You could use the hours, and I think we need to try to improve. I understand the staffing issues, but improve on the timeliness of applications.
Comments, Michael?
I don't want to belabor this point, but just a point of clarification. Ms. Fisher made a motion, but it was not the recommendation. She did not move the recommendation of OGS. So what we voted on was one motion. We still have not voted on the recommendation of OGS, so the tabling is appropriate.
Thank you. Any other comments on the matter? If we can move to open council discussion to bring before the council. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Michael. One last point. Somebody brought up at the last meeting, I'm sorry, Michael, sir, you, Michael Hurt? Excuse me. Brought up wanting a request on e-procurement. And so for now, we're in the process right now of sourcing relative to e-procurement. So once that is, when it's appropriate, I would love to bring a presentation to the body as to where the direction of e-procurement is going, the impact on the business community, and how this body can help in furthering that effort.
Just a point of clarification. I also wanted to make sure that as the e-procurement process moves forward, that the preferred source portion of that is incorporated into the RFP as it moves forward. I did attend the RFIs for e-procurement, and it was not clear what the participation would be for preferred sources, nor how that would be implemented going forward. I do understand there's a lot of back office applications that will be required as part of this process, but I thought it would be important that the council be actively involved in the review to ensure that the preferred sources and the requirements of the Procurement Council are met.
Excellent. Will do. Anything else for discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Sir?
Earlier, we talked about the green initiative, making sure that we're doing the things we need to do. It seems of such import to me that we should take the effort to incorporate that more fully into the body of what we're working from. It just seems like to let it sit toward the back is not really where we want that from an emphasis standpoint. And I'm not suggesting that we do the overall review that is called for at a certain point here, but if we could just redo and insert within the main body of our guidance the green piece, it seems to me that makes some sense. If I could suggest that.
Comments to that?
I would agree that when things are separated out, they appear temporary.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
James? Second? Nancy? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you so much for your time, and public, thank you so much.